So our final speaker is Wolfgang Lutz. He presents a paper of 7 authors. The topic is Years of Good Life in Contemporary and Historical Settings.
Thank you very much. As you see, indeed, this is a big team of people, and this is part of my ERC project on the demography of sustainable human well-being. Most of the slides have been produced by Anna, and the long time slides that will show at the end on Finland have been produced by Claudia. Now, what is the ultimate end of human development? What are we striving for? This is, of course, one of the biggest questions we can ask, but it's hardly ever posed in such a general way. And sustainability science, which is a relatively recent field of science and is really cross-disciplinary, trying to sort of operationalize this notion of sustainable development that is now ubiquitous into a more operational way of dealing. And one formula that has become very important here, introduced by Clark and others, is that on the left-hand side you have some well-being indicator for a specific group of people, not necessarily a national population, I'll come to this later, any group of people at a given point in time, which is a function of all kinds of determinants. And in sustainability science they group these different capitals, which is for the economic capitals, it's the human capital and also natural capital, which is very important. I mean, human capital is the individual people, their skills, their abilities, and the natural capital is sort of the life support system of the environment that includes prominently, of course, concerns about climate change, but also concerns about declining biodiversity. That should all be factored in as something jointly with the other capitals producing human well-being. And then it's got sort of the institutions, it's our laws and the rules and norms, and knowledge science has something to play here. So this is what we've been starting from, and interestingly, most of the work in the field by Partha Gupta or others really has focused on the right-hand side, what is called inclusive wealth or inclusive capital, and see how, for instance, environmental pollution and decline impacts on this inclusive wealth, rather than focusing explicitly on the left-hand side on the W. And that is what our project tries to do. And I mean, as you're all aware, the field of well-being indicators is just mushrooming. You just right now have 2 new proposals, and there are 2 dozen at least prominent indicators out there in the literature. So what we decided to do is not just more or less randomly try to improve along this line or that line, but rather systematically go around and specify a tailor-made indicator that can serve as the sustainability criterion. So if it's improving, we are on a sustainable path. And that follows 6 explicitly defined criteria. Well, the first criterion evidently is that it needs to embody universal shared value as what is the ultimate end, something that both a Buddhist monk and a Wall Street broker would sort of agree. And one evident such value seems to be survival and avoidance of premature death of yourself or your people you care about. Just a footnote, I mean, this is really essential that we have survival explicitly in it. Because otherwise, for many of the other indicators, always if you kill off the weaker ones, if you kill off the unhappy ones, you will increase average happiness. So you either need some binding side constraint of not killing people or human rights, whatever, but rather endogenize them, because otherwise the optimal solution will always be killing off the weak. So we need to explicitly have in this criteria the survival and the length of life. Another very important in our mind is that it needs to be based on individual characteristics that can be flexibly aggregated to subpopulations. Many of the prominent indicators can only be calculated at national level. Anything that's GDP based, and also what you just heard now, is they are sort of at the national level, these indicators. But we're interested in whether women and men have different quality of life. There is no gender-specific GDP where you can, it's very hard to construct Or in many others, you want to be ethnic groups, you want to be urban and rural population. So this is something really based sort of on something that's principally individually measurable and then can be aggregated to subpopulations. And then it needs to be comparable over time and across subpopulations. Very important also, it should be based on theory, and there should not be implicit trade-offs or arbitrary weighting. I mean, whenever you put many dimensions together, there is sort of weighting involved, and sometimes like the Human Development Index, this is not really explicit, but they have been papers showing very clearly that, I mean, an increase in life expectancy to some degree corresponds to a certain increase in income also. But there are these trade-offs, and we should try to avoid these implicit trade-offs. And then there needs to be empirical information to actually calculate it and make it appropriate as the dependent variable in estimating such well-being production function. And if possible, it should have a real-life analogy that was also mentioned by Klaus. It's the years of life to be lived as good years is something that we have an intuitive notion of rather than an index of 0.783 or whatever, nobody knows what it means. Now this is our proposal. I don't really have time now, so we have long discussions that should be more focused on the subjective or on the objective side. There is really a big divide, as has been discussed in the keynote. Of course, this is the whole school of thinking. Subjective is the only way, life satisfaction or whatever, how we measure it. And they are really sort of discounting the objective measures. Just an example, Richard Easterly, one of the famous population economists, I had the good fortune to have my training with him at the University of Pennsylvania, and he was on my dissertation committee. He's, of course, one of the gurus of subjective of happiness research, and this famous Easterling paradox that happiness does not increase with income. And I recently asked him whether he would like to be a reviewer on this, and said, Wolfgang, I should warn you, I will only accept subjective indicators. So we didn't send it to him, because there is really the other school of thinking, like it's actually more powerful of economists, and what we just heard now, the two new indicators, is something objectively measurable. So how can we possibly combine this? So the way we did it is that we have overall life expectancy is like the years of life that a person is like. That's the founding principle, and that's where we also have good data for many, many populations for time series around the world. And then you have to be above a minimum level, both on the objective and on the subjective side. So we have to above on a score on subjective well-being, and also for what is called capable longevity. That's actually a notion coined by Amartya Sen in some of his early writings. You have to be out of absolute poverty and free from physical and cognitive limitations. So these are sort of the objective factors. And now we combine them in the Sullivan method in the life table. I think you're most familiar with this, that we just weight the big Li, the person has lived, with the proportion that are above this critical threshold. But at the same time, both of the subjective and the objective, so there's no trade-offs. You either are, here is either good life or not. And that is sort of how you calculate it. Let's just quickly go. We have this now for many countries. So the YoGI years of good life and the different constituents of it. You see the typical suspects like Sweden, Netherlands, and so on, quite high up. Here we, now from surveys based, we have both for men and women, something you cannot do for the others. And then we also have 2 points in time, and you see green is the YoGIs, and then you have sort of life expectancies usually higher, and the YoGI is usually lower. You see, even in countries such as South Africa, that's an interesting case where due to AIDS, the life expectancy has declined. Still, the YoGIs have moved up because some of the other components, including poverty, have improved over time. So there is a fair number of countries for which you can do this for different points in time. And since time is running, good data are from the share, where we only have the population above the age of 50, so we can estimate YoGIs because share has all these dimensions in one survey. Otherwise, we have to do a lot of imputations and estimations, and that is because sustainable development is about the very long run. We've recently had a paper with Claudia about the world's longest demographic time series in Finland from 1722 to 2100. And let me just show you, this is life expectancy And of course, for the future, we have different scenarios how life expectancy increases. But you see these very strong fluctuations until about the middle of the 20th century, and then a rather constant increase. Now, here we have some literacy, reading and writing skills and so on. Let's just go on to the end where we have life expectancy now in the long run, and YoGL is the green one, the years of good life. And you see recently, the difference is a bit widening, because this has to do with the aging population, where the declining health and declining cognitive skills of some of the elderly population, but essentially they are supposed to move in parallel. And now coming to the end, in this project we are of course asking one of the biggest questions that research can possibly ask: what are the preconditions for sustainable human well-being on this planet? So we first want to estimate now YoGL for consistent time series, at least from 1970 to 2015, for all countries in the world and for many, many subpopulations, consistently men and women, but also regions and so on. So that is where we are right now, after having defined the indicator. Then the next very daunting prospect is to estimate a well-being production function based on a set of capitals. And here it's important that we have a clear distinction between what are the determinants of human well-being and what do we consider constituents. For instance, education, as in the HDI, it's a constituent. We see it as a determinant, and only then the cognitive health as a constituent. And finally, then, probably even the one that will never be finished, and that is really an ongoing task, but it still has to be addressed, is try to operationalize this population development environment modeling, which at YASA, so we've been doing for the last 20 years, capture quantitatively the interactions and feedbacks on YoGL. So how will climate change affect future human well-being? That's the $100,000 question. Thank you.